One of the whole reasons we're doing this conversation is because of the number of people that have reached out to me personally, and I know that others are getting reached out, and I'm sure your inbound traffic has picked up. Leaders in organizations and employees in organizations want to do something, right? They want to be able to make this change that needs to be made. What would you say a leader's role would be in addressing racism? And before you answer that question, what is a definition in your mind of a leader?
Oh, I love that. So yeah, when I think about a leader, I really think about if there are two people in a room, they're both leaders because they're modeling their behavior to another. So they don't have to have a title that says leader on there. Is a leader to me is somebody, when you're in an interaction, when two people are in an interaction, they're both modeling for each other what could be, what's possible, right? Or perhaps bad behavior too, right? And so this is, that when I think about leader, I think of integrity. And I'm sure you've heard the definition of integrity of doing the right thing even when no one else is in the room, or just doing the right thing always, and being who you say you are, and doing what you say you're going to do. So yeah, so I have a very broad definition of leader. Some people are very specific to it has to be the CEO or CFO of a company. I think it's way bigger than that.
Well, I think we're all leaders. So let's go with that focus, right? And we can certainly talk about some of the specific leaders that might be the CEO, or you might be the head of an organization. But because I think there are a lot of people on this webinar who aren't necessarily running an organization, but they can influence and they want to make some changes there. So what would you say are the role would be? Let's take a non-Black person or who is trying to deal with this racism issue in their organization and in the world. What do you see their role being?
Mm-hmm. And I would say, for anyone, whatever their race, I would say the same thing, that we need to get involved in these conversations. So what I've heard most often in the last couple of months since George Floyd's murder is the idea that, nothing's wrong in my company. Like we're doing fine. No one's complained, so therefore we must be doing fine. And I'll tell you, I'm just gonna take a little bit of a detour in the sense that my own research, I did for my dissertation, I actually asked leaders from around the country, how prepared are you to build cultural inclusion? And overwhelmingly their answer was, what do you think? Are you prepared to build cultural inclusion? Like when I asked these leaders, of course their answer was yes, right?
Yeah, of course.
Like jumping in like, oh yeah, I'm good. Like I know how to do this, right? And then I asked the question, do you do this and do you do this and do you do that? And I had called best practices around diversity and inclusion. What are the best practices around culturally inclusive behavior? And when they started, pulling it apart, it was like, no. Like they weren't behaving culturally inclusively, even though they said they were prepared to build cultural inclusion. So there's a disconnect here, and we really want to believe. And by the way, it was a national study, robust study. It's not like those people who it's really, we can generalize because it was so big, such a large study. And so we really want to believe, well, I'm a nice person, therefore we're good. And as it turns out, being nice just isn't enough. We really absolutely need to be engaging. We need to be preparing. We need to be, asking the questions of, folks in our, and not just focusing on folks of color to say, what's your experience? And there's been some really problematic behavior in certain organizations that are saying, let's put 3, folks of color on a panel and have them share their stories, which is really problematic. So I don't encourage that, but I would encourage some sort of surveying anonymously. You put, people's race in so where they are. But I want to get back also to the first question you asked, which is, you know, why racism in particular, right? And in my experience, my work has always been intersectional. It's not just around race, it's also around gender and sexuality and social class differences and disability and age and all of these different social identities. And we're focusing on racism right now because I believe with George Floyd's murder, there was a tipping point in our country. And so that's the key. But we don't want to leave out the other social identities or different races, by the way, or ethnicities that are struggling or being challenged at this time too. So a lot of work being done around gender and sexual orientation, all of these other pieces. We want to try to incorporate all of that. It's a big job, but I believe that leaders should be engaging in this work and asking the questions. Like I said, even an anonymous survey would be, you know, is a great way to start.